Mandy and I were talking at first, and he brought up, well, maybe they want to know what it takes as far as what kind of maintenance is there for these vehicles compared to an internal combustion engine car. And for the most part, there's very little at all that is different. In fact, in most of the maintenance lists, it's a lot of checking and looking and making sure things are good. One of the standout things would be checking the charging equipment cables to make sure that they're not chafing or they're broken or something like that. But as far as other servicing for these vehicles, there's really nothing. In fact, you even take a Taycan that has a 2-speed transmission in the back, there is literally no oil change service for that thing for the life of the vehicle. The transmission itself just does not generate any kind of debris or wear on that oil, therefore it is good for life. So basically you don't have, if it's a BEV, there's no oil changes, there's, you put wiper blades on it. Every 6 years you're going to have to put brakes on it, because with all the regenerative braking on these vehicles, the brakes are used very little, extremely little. So the worry is, just like with tires, when you don't use something, you lose it. Therefore, there's a possibility that the pads, from not being used often enough, could deteriorate and not, let's say, give you 100% when you really need them after that particular time period. So that's the recommended replacement for it. The Macan BEV actually has an interesting addition to that. It also has a 6-year replacement for the brakes, but it also has, for the rear hatch, it has a motorized strut, and every 6 years they want you to replace that strut. Probably because it's just a single strut working that hatch, and it's probably had a fair amount of use, and they kind of figure at that point failure is an option. You know, so there's very little on a maintenance standpoint. But, yes, sir?
For the brakes, do you have to replace the rotors then, since it's used seldomly, or it's just
No, it's brake pads. Brake pads. And of course, we still have, with all the cars, every 2 years you should be changing your brake fluid, because they will absorb moisture and it will start to deteriorate. It will start to grow organic material in it, and that can damage all of the metal surfaces inside lines and cylinders and everything else. Now if you have a PHEV, okay, a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, you are going to have normal maintenance that goes along with also having an internal combustion engine. So those maintenance things have not changed, okay? So you're still going to have to deal with those. But if we go to, for example, a dealer, for a technician to work on your car, it's a completely different deal. He has to be certified, he has to be aware of numerous things to make sure that he stays safe, he keeps the car safe, and also he keeps you safe when the car gets back on the road. So today's agenda, let's start off with maybe a little bit of history, because Porsche has been in the electric car field for a very long time. So does anybody know what this is? What is it? It's an electric motor. It's an electric wheel hub motor. So Ferdinand Porsche designed this when he was 18 years old in 1893. He was with the Bella Egger Electronics Company in Vienna. 3 years later, in 96, he patented it, okay? So once he had these wheel hub motors, he basically changed jobs. He went to work for Jacob Lohner, also, which was a carrossery body, building company, also in Vienna. And together with, Jacob Lohner, together with him, Jacob did a platform for the vehicle for Ferdinand to put these wheel hub motors on, and they made the Lohner Porsche. Now, at that time, these wheel hub motors had an output of about 2.5 horsepower each. But it still allowed a top speed of about 32 kilometers an hour. And that's with hauling around about 904 pounds of lead acid batteries. So not too bad, but front wheel drive. So then it was 1900, and this car was actually introduced to the world in Paris at the, I believe it was called the World Trade Center, or World Trade Fair at that particular point. And also in 1900, auto racing was becoming popular. So Ferdinand Porsche took 4 of these and fitted them to another 2 to the rear axle, and now he had the world's first all-wheel drive vehicle. Now, where am I getting my facts? Porsche Museum, where else? Okay, just so you know. So he had the world's first, but they had up the power. Each wheel motor was up to 14 horsepower on that car, okay? Then, of course, within that time period, they all messed around with different versions of, or different powers, where they would fit road vehicles, they would make buses, they would make trucks. Ultimately, the basic range was somewhere around 50 kilometers. That's about 30 miles they could get out of any of these vehicles to be driving around, okay? But that story didn't end then, because now, with all these batteries, these lead-acid batteries, as you know, as heavy as they are, Ferdinand Porsche took a 15 horsepower, 4-cylinder engine, mated it to an 80 watt generator or dynamo with a smaller bunch of batteries in the car to lower the weight of the car. And then the generator could power the wheel hub motors directly, or they could also charge the battery. So now you had the world's first hybrid. Nobody else had done that before. So Porsche's been cutting edge since the beginning with this, and ideas never seem to die at Porsche. They might be shelved because there's not, maybe immediately there's not the proper electronics or metals or technology to make something work, but the idea itself will just sit there until they can pull it out and they can start using it. So, so it doesn't stop there. Actually, the Lohner Porsche Mixed T, I believe it's pronounced, stands for mixed, okay? So basically a hybrid, right? So we had the first electric car, we had the first 4-wheel drive car, we had also the first hybrid and electric. Then, of course, some other honorable mentions. Of course, everybody knows the 918, okay, where we went with lithium-ion batteries. And then from a racing standpoint, we had the 911 GT3R hybrid in 2010, where we used basically a giant KERS unit and 2 front wheel motors, not hub motors, but 2 motors on the front axle. The 919 hybrid, of course, what did we get out of that? 4 Le Mans wins, 14, 15, 16, 17. So overall 19 total Le Mans wins for us. That car helped us. Of course, does anybody follow Formula E, where Porsche has you know, the 99X electric Gen 3 Evo racer, where we test and put our technology to the test. And of course, now we have the 963 hypercar that is already proving to be as successful as the 962 and of course any other probably race car Porsche has made. So those are the honorable mentions, but if you look at the rest of this, we have the Cayenne, the Panamera, the Taycan, the Macan BEV, the 992 GTS. These are all the ones that we've been putting out to the public since we started making them. The Cayenne started in 2011. It had nickel metal hydrate technology. It was only about 288 volts. I think it had possibly about maybe 23 kilowatt hours of energy content. Maybe you got about 1.5 miles of straight electric driving out of it, just the way it is. But then in 2015, we came out with our first gen lithium-ion battery for the Cayenne. We also came out with it for the Panamera as well, our first gen lithium-ion. Immediately, we went up to about 382 volts. We jumped up to about 95 kilowatts of kilowatt hours of energy, and 15 to maybe 22 miles, depending on how you drove that car, you could get pure electric driving. And then in 19, we went to our Gen 3 battery. Again, a higher energy content, more driving capability. And then finally, now we're up to the final version. I'm sorry, that was the Gen 2. The Gen 3 came out in 2024 for both the Panamera and also for the Cayenne. And now we're up to basically 400 volts. And we have about, what is our energy content? It's about 26, I think, 25, 26 for energy content for the battery, okay? All along the way, the electric motors also kept up from 34 kilowatts to 70 kilowatts to 100 kilowatts to 130 kilowatts. So the cars themselves, to keep up to match the batteries and give a better, longer driving experience, you know, they kept up as well. If we're looking at a Taycan, of course, it's an all-electric vehicle. Our current energy content for that battery is about 105 kilowatts, kilowatt hours for the 2025. And that's not only going to aid in performance, but it's also going to aid us in, because of battery technology, also faster charging and whatnot. I don't know if you know, but the Taycan has a bunch of different records for being an electric vehicle, okay? One of them is a coast-to-coast charging record. Less than 2.5 hours to drive from New York to California. All you got to do is use Route Planner. It'll take you the way, you find the station, plug in, 20 minutes later, you're back on the road. Coast to coast, Guinness Book of World Record. We just set one for over 10 miles of drifting in the snow with the Taycan. So that's a record, Guinness Book of World Record. We also have a land speed record indoor with the Taycan on a polished concrete surface, showing off its ability to accelerate and brake before it hits the wall on the other side, because that's one of the requirements of that. You basically start here, you head towards that wall, you go as fast as you can, and then stop and don't hit it. And we were like 102.6 mile an hour, setting a Guinness Book of World Record. So these are formidable automobiles. Of course, we have the new Macan BEV. So that's also 800 volt system. But the technology on that has advanced us to quicker and faster charging through having a different type of electrical hookup. So for example, you pull up to a 400 volt charging station. The contactors inside of the central box can connect that battery in a parallel setup. So now we can charge 2 banks, each at 400, which aids in the charging. Or if you pull up to a fast charge 800 volt, we will connect it in series and just simply charge the whole battery. So we're not sitting on our laurels, we're not putting out hub motors anymore, but we are certainly in the game for making the best BEVs that we can. And you learned all about the 992 GTS this morning, okay? So these are the vehicles that are available to you now. Okay, so let's start taking a look at some stuff. So if you're going to bring your car to the dealer, the first thing that has to happen is it has to go to the right person. And in order to do that, they have to be certified to work on the cars. And we have a couple of different levels to do that. So our first level is EIP. It stands for Electrically Instructed Person. Now, that guy, he can do anything that an HVT, who is the next level up, supervises him to do. So he's not allowed to do certain things like switch off the high voltage power or switch it back on or work on a car that in theory cannot be switched off or shut down, okay? But he can do a variety of things that as long as the HVT says it's okay that he can do. Some of those things the HVT might have to switch off the car for him to do. But he also can do things, there are a lot of things you can do on the car with just leaving the high voltage battery hooked up, that you're in no danger whatsoever. But you must sort out what those things are, and he can't make a move without the HVT. So one of the things an EIP has to do is we have for example, we have the PTAP program here. And there is, or even just for anybody at the dealer, first thing they have to do is fill out and study a 44-page document and sign off on it that they understand everything they're looking at from technology. It gets them familiar with the vehicle, where the components are, different aspects of operating the vehicle, charging, et cetera, et cetera. It's not a small document because we're talking about high voltage, so it's not a joke thing to just sign off on. So they would have to do that, and then they get instruction from an HVT, and then they can be labeled an EIP. They should appropriately realize and identify that they can't take a step without the HVT showing them or telling them what to do. The next thing you would want to do, if you want to get out of that position, you're going to have to come to our P29 class. This is where you're going to learn more about the workings of the vehicle. This is where you're going to learn how to shut these cars down and also re-energize them when they need to be to go back out on the road. So they get not only more training on the vehicle, but a whole bunch of high voltage or electrical safety training so that they fully understand what they're up against and how they can be safe working on the vehicle. After they get that, our last step to become an HVE is actually 2 steps. First, we have high voltage safety. High voltage safety is a course that you need because it's going to be further safety training to train you on what to do if you cannot de-energize a vehicle. In that case, you may have to work on a car that is actually live. So you need the proper training to be able to do that safely. That's going to involve a whole lot of working with PPE and using special test equipment, special tools, so that you can do it safely and you can identify the problem, you can correct the problem. But one thing they're not allowed to do is they are not allowed to do anything with the battery because they're not a battery repair technician yet. So if they would troubleshoot the car, for example, find out that the e-box, the contactors would not open in that particular case, they would be allowed, that is not in the battery, that is not the battery, they would be able to then pull that battery out, and they would be able to replace that e-box. If they would do, for example, have an insulation fault and find out it's inside the battery through their troubleshooting procedure, they're going to have to tap out and give it to the HVE because they can't go any further. So once they get their HVS training, they can then get their battery repair training, then they will be an HVE, and then they can do anything on the vehicle. So it's a process to make sure that everybody stays in their lane. Everybody knows what it is they need to do ultimately to be safe working on these vehicles.
So is there 3 separate classes you have to take?
Well, Yes, it would be 29 HVS and battery repair training, right? Because this is sort of a home study. You pull this document off of our Porsche Partner Network, out of our PCSS area, and they need to go over it, study it, sign off on it, and then get instruction from the HVT, and then they can become a EIP. There's actually a separate one that's only 15 pages if you want to work on Taycans, because the first one will handle your hybrids, but if you want to do BEVs as well, you're going to have to do the second one. So we can add another 15 pages of study and instruction on top of the 44. So the next thing the technician needs to do, and the dealer needs to do, okay, is we need to establish a safe workplace, okay? So imagine if you were working at your house and you didn't throw the breaker, you just went in and pulled out a socket out of the wall and just let the wires hang in there. Nobody knows. Everybody would think you probably threw the breaker. Maybe you didn't. You know, you were able to get those wires off and everything's good. That's not a safe workplace. And the point is that, you know, you're working on the car. You know what condition it's in. You know if it has problems. You know if you shut the car down or de-energized it or isolated it from the power supply, as we like to say, okay? But nobody else knows. Certainly a service writer. How many of you guys have gone to the dealer, you know, and just ran in, you forgot something in your car and you got to get out of the trunk or out of the inside of the car when it's at the dealer? We can't have you doing that with a high voltage vehicle. That's why we have to make it a safe place, and we have various ways of doing that, okay? First thing, we need vehicle status to be identified on the vehicle. So you're going to drive that car into the shop, and you're immediately going to put one of these signs on it. So as you can see, it says HV battery voltage switched on. Work must only be performed by a high voltage technician or an HVS or an HVE, okay? But not an EIP unless he's told he can do something on it. Also on this, there is a line for the guy working on it, the HVT who's working on it, to put his name in and also put his phone number down, because nobody's allowed to re-energize that car except for the guy who de-energized it. So we want to make sure that if somebody else, you get sick, you don't come to work, and you shut that car down, we can call you up, another HVT, and say, hey, what'd you do? What do I need to look out for? What can I, that would be a situation that two HVTs could work out. But other than that, if we can't get a hold of you, that car's sitting. Nobody's touching that car. Only you. You're the only one who safely knows what condition it's in. If we do have to de-energize it or isolate it from the power supply, we switch signs. We put on the green one saying, okay, this car's safe. So now you can grab things out of the car or whatever needs to be done. Somebody can look under the hood or something along those lines. So we must have vehicle status out there for everybody to see so that they know. Sometimes people don't even see the hybrid symbol on the side of the car. Or now you can't count on green calipers any longer, right? You can get any color caliper you want on your hybrid. So it does not have to be. There we got a BEV, it's got red calipers, you know? So the vehicle status is important. If you're doing work on the car, we always tell them it's good to get used to using our insulated tools. So here's an example. I call them our Fisher-Price tools. Now, it looks like something you bought your kid for Christmas, right? But they're completely 100% insulated with coatings. So if you would come in contact with something, it's not going to transfer to you.
Now, is that where the casing comes damaged, it's no longer useful, or can you replace the casings?
No, the casings are not replaceable. If the casings would wear out, fall off, dry out, you're putting a new one on, right? And it's still just a regular tool underneath. If the ratchet part strips, you're getting a new tool. You certainly don't want to be working with tools that would cause you to possibly have a secondary accident, especially when we're talking about high voltage. So yeah, you would just get a whole new tool in that particular case. But this extends also to things like torque wrenches and T-handles, and there are so many tools that we have. So even if you're just shutting it down and you're working on it, we kind of encourage them to work with them to get used to it, because that way, if it becomes second nature and you're working on these cars, you won't forget. Because if you forget and you do need them, it's too late. So some of the other tools, we have high voltage test adapters. I've got a whole cart here of these adapters, okay? And these are very important. They all have different plugs for the different cars, for the different years, to plug into the different circuits. It could be plugging into a booster converter, or it could be plugging into a heater, or it could be plugging into a power electronics / pulse inverter. All these components have specific plugs, and that's a good thing because we don't want to worry about mixing up our wires or our lines. So only certain lines are going to fit where they should, but because of that, we need many adapters in order to work and take tests, make tests, and get readings and everything out of the vehicle. And then, of course, we have PPE, okay? So PPE is mandatory if you're working on a live car. So if you have an isolation fault, if you have contactors that will not open, you must be wearing your PPE. And certainly if you're doing battery repair, you should have all of your PPE on. There's various dangers. Generally, the equipment here, the shield, the gloves, the jacket, the pants, these basically protect you against second-degree burns from arc flashes and that type of thing. The gloves electrically will protect you. So gloves, class 0, are going to protect you up to about 1,500 volts of DC voltage. Okay? Yes, sir.
Years ago, I was trained for working on hybrids when they came around with the orange installation there, and we were told that when it was shut off, if you had an off switch, because all vehicles did not have them, the discharge or the capacitor of the batteries were not discharged, and you could still get harmed. So PPE obviously could protect you, but I'm aware that you need to have it on to do some testing so that you can do a proper diagnosis.
Okay. Very good question, and you're right. And what you're talking about is active or passive discharge. A lot of the components have giant capacitors in them. Some of them could hold as much as 400 volts. So even if I can open the switch or the contactors and disconnect the power source from the rest of the high voltage system, meaning the rest of the car basically, even though it's important to know that your high voltage system has no connection to the rest of the car. There is no physical connection to the low voltage system. There is just no connection to anything. It is completely isolated. So you can think of it as all that at high voltage just floating in midair in the middle of your car. There's literally no connection. So when we shut down a car, okay, we have two methods. Okay, we have automatic, which we use our Porsche tester 4th generation. We have automatic, which is a program, and it runs through, and it will determine through a series of tests if the voltages have been dissipated and if it was safely shut down. The contactors opened and it's okay to go ahead on, right? So that would be the first thing. So it's a perfectly safe test to do, of course. You're using the tester, but it's also safe to trust that test. If the car does not have a fault, okay, for example, if the test goes through, you are guaranteed that that car is shut down. But in the case of cars having faults, or in the case of the test, the automatic test not running, okay, we have a second procedure, and it's called the manual. deactivation or isolation of the power supply. So in that case, it's also a program. And the reason it's a program is because we're going to use these test boxes. We are also going to be using this differential oscope meter, okay, to do all of our tests. This little beauty plugs into our Porsche tester, and when I probe any part of the system with these leads, I could go up to 800 volts. The 800 volts stops here. It does not get into the tester. It completely isolates the tester. The reason that's important is because even though the dealer is responsible to supply this stuff to you, you're responsible for your shoes. Now you need electrically isolating shoes, okay? We want no connection to the ground at all because the tester plugs into this wall socket right over here. And that ground lug, we call that potential earth. Before you charge your car when you plug it in, the first thing that has to happen is the vehicle has to connect with potential earth, okay? Because the vehicle, through something called the IT system, has safety systems that are basically connecting all the housings together. Therefore, if you have an isolation fault, for example, the car could have a single fault potential. Not both positive or negative potential, but maybe a negative or a positive potential could be on that particular fault. But this here, along with your shoes and everything, if there was some sort of a ground fault loop and maybe the car had a positive potential, you could possibly pick up a ground fault loop through actually the ground. You could possibly get an electric shock doing that, okay? But the manual, the first thing we're going to do is we have to test this, okay? Because inside here, we have two 100,000 ohm resistors. So, does anybody know Ohm's law? Okay, so 800 volts with 100,000 ohms. What are we looking at as far as amperage? 8 milliamps, okay? But there's two, so it's 200,000. So now we have 4 milliamps. That's the maximum current that could get to us if that car is live and something goes wrong by probing this thing and checking for voltage. Okay? So this is a safety device. It not only gives us a place to find out, did the contactors open? Because when I go in here to positive and negative and I test this, I should read less than 10 volts. Okay? Yes?
Where do you plug that in? Under the dash or in the back?
No, you plug this right to high voltage components. So generally, let's say for the Taycan, we're going to plug this in the line that runs from the booster converter to the high voltage heater. Okay? It's in the obviously the high voltage system, not the 400 volt, but the 800 volt system. And if we don't have voltage there, then we know that the automatic did work and the car is shut down. We also, let's say the active discharge didn't work, okay? We might pick up something, but we still have passive discharge. So for example, passive discharge would be running inside a big resistor between our positive and our negative potentials. And it's a very large resistor, but over a period of maybe, I don't know, 4 minutes, it will literally discharge the capacitor from 400 down to no volts. The active is a switch. Second you turn off the car, that switch closes. Within about 250 milliseconds, boom, all those capacitors are discharged, okay? But I can't imagine anything weirder that we would be reading voltage because of those capacitors. They will discharge. But contactors, if they weld shut or they just refuse to work and open, we will read on a PHEV, we could read 400 volts here, we could read 800 volts here, okay? So one of the things the technician has to do to make sure this is safe, he does 9 tests on this one. So he's going to go from negative, excuse me, he's going to go from negative to, shield to positive, and he should read, oh, wrong end, my apologies. We're going to go from positive to positive, and we should read 100,000 ohms. Now we're going to go positive to negative, but we should read open circuit. We should go positive to shield, open circuit. Negative to negative, it should be 100,000 ohms. Shield to negative, open circuit. Positive to shield, open circuit. And then shield to negative, open, shield to positive, open, shield to shield, 0 ohms. Because there's no resistor there, should be a direct, low resistance connection, right? Then we have to do another 9 on the other leg, because we have 2 wires. So that's a total of 18 tests we're going to do before we use this, plug it in to make sure that that car is shut down. Then we can take what we call an all-pole measurement. We're going to go positive to negative. We're going to go positive to shield. This is just a voltage test now. And then shield to negative, and we should have 0 on all counts, or less than 10 volts. So that would be the manual. So if that passes that test, then we know the car is shut down and it's safe to work on. Yes, sir.
So how long does it take before you can start working on the car to safe everything?
Well, if you've never done it before, it's probably going to be about 45 minutes, you know,
Which is all
figuring it out and
chargeable minutes, right?
Following the instructions, finding the right tool and everything. It can take a little bit of time. But if you get used to it, if you've done it a few times, you can have that car shut down in, you know, maximum of 15 minutes. That car is ready to be working on. Replacing components, or maybe pulling the battery out, or maybe replacing the catalytic converter on the driver's side of a Cayenne. Because on that one, we need to shut the vehicle down. But for the passenger side, we don't need to. There's no lines over there. Nothing we have to disconnect as far as the high voltage. Yes?
So is there an auto shutdown in the case of an accident? Because I was talking to EMTs where there's different EVs out there now, and they're saying it's a real issue with them when there's an accident, how to safe that vehicle to get to people.
There is auto shutdown for the vehicle. For example, there's crash, okay? In the event of crash, the contactors will open, okay? It will shut it down. And you won't be able to re-energize those unless a technician has thoroughly checked out the car, made sure that there's no accident damage to high voltage components that could put you in what we call the danger zone, exposed wires and whatnot, okay? But as far as the EMTs go, they get on their laptops information from all the manufacturers of all the emergency things for these cars. So for example, when we shut our cars down, we have, this is the switch out of an old 2011 nickel metal hydrate car. And when you slide this thing over and then you pull it up and then you pull it out. First thing that happened when I slid this thing over is there's 2 little contacts in here, and it's called pilot line. Second that pilot line opens, the contactors open. Once I pull this thing out, I've now split my battery in 2. Now I have 2 144 volt batteries. Now 144 volts is still enough to kill you. Okay, anything over 60 DC, anything over 30 AC, but we've limited the concentration of voltage. We've made it much more safe that you can work on the vehicle and not worry about it. But if you look, there's 2 little contacts here, and the way this works, the second you slide it, I've opened those contacts. My contactors have opened. Anyways, they're told where these are. For example, that's on the battery. If we look at the newer cars, we have this little switch, okay? This is called our service disconnector. There's also a pilot line in here, but there's also another one called 30C, and that's basically power to the contactors. When I pull it up, I open 2 things. It's a redundancy. On the opposite end of the car, opposite end of the car, there's a fuse box with a fuse with a little yellow tag around it, identifying it as 30C. If the car's hitting the front and they can't get to this, they go to the back and they simply pull the fuse and they've opened the contactors. Now, the one thing we can't do for them, though, is if the contactors, the accident was severe enough, something got crushed and shorted, and the current draw was enough to weld the contactors shut, we can't do anything for you. They're just going to be, it's going to be a live car, and they're going to have to deal with that. Yes?
Thank you.
Do any of the Porsche vehicles have a pyro fuse?
Yes, they do. They absolutely do. So, for example, well, let's move on here a little bit, because a lot of these questions are through this. Anyways, one of the other things, just to finish this up, a safe workplace. If you do have a car that has some sort of issue, you can't shut it down, you have the battery out of it, maybe you have an insulation fault, maybe you have a battery that's not passing its, what do you call it? Forgetting the name of it. Anyways, a battery you have to monitor. We have cordons to put around it, keep people away. You can see we have some of the signs over there depending on what it could be. Still hooked up electrically. Basically, this guy here is just stay away. You're not allowed in here. You know, that would be for any situation. But possibly no smoking, of course, and maybe we have a battery because this thing's being quarantined out back. It wouldn't be in the shop, but it might have a leak, or it might be releasing releasing some kinds of gas or something like that. We have enough of these to warn you exactly what's going on with it. Basically, stay away from it, okay? So, basic protection. Okay, so in the car, we have all of these components. We have lines, we have rubber, we then have shielding that goes around, then we have foil, then we have another piece of rubber insulation, then we have basically the copper core, okay? On the outside, we have aramid wrapping, okay, that is super tough. So they're abrasion resistant. It's really hard to get one of these things open, but I'm sure there's an accident that could do it and expose some of the wire, okay? These connectors, for example, you can't even, if you look at these connectors, everything's plastic in there. You'd have to work pretty hard, just like on this wall socket. If you want to electrocute yourself, I'm sure you could figure it out. It's the same thing here. That's why we call this all intrinsic safety, okay? That it's protecting you whether you know it or not. And all the connectors on all the different boxes are constructed the same way, okay? So those are just a few of the basic protections that we have. Fault protection is this here. Okay, so you asked about it's not a pyro fuse, but it's a fuse, okay, that's in the system for the big battery, okay? That all hybrid and battery cars are built with what we call the IT system. It's the way we connect it up with the rest of the vehicle. The two letters symbolize different things. I means we are completely isolating the power source from everything else. So the battery, the 800 volts to 400 volts, we are completely, it's not connected to anything else in the vehicle. The T means that we are going to take all the individual housings of all the components and we are going to connect them together through what we call equipotential bonding, because these resistance values are super low. We're down into less than 40 or less than 10 milliohms, okay? They are super good connections, just in case we have a double fault, okay? So this is showing a single fault. This positive potential should never be reaching the housing on any component on a hybrid, okay? So if you have one housing that's doing that, that would be an insulation fault, that would be a single potential. So it takes two potentials to get electrocuted. It also takes two to blow that fuse. So if I would draw here another box, another component, okay, and I had these same two coming over, okay? But now on this side, oh, I got to do this. There's my equipotential bonding. If all of a sudden this control unit on the same car developed a single fault, but on the negative side, so they come down here, but now all of a sudden this reaches it, I now have a connection through my equipotential bonding, which is basically my PE, which is the chassis of my vehicle. It's like connecting the two wires together, and that fuse is going to blow. So in the case of an accident, if there's some sort of a short, a high amperage draw, it's long enough, maybe it welds the contactors, or maybe it just blows the fuse. Or maybe the car stays live, and they have to just start cutting some cables. Simple as that, you know? So this is fault protection to make sure that you're safe. For example, if I would have a bad connection here, okay, on this control unit, you're about 1,000 ohms, right? But I guarantee you, at this point, you're going to be the path of least resistance. You're not going to last very long. It's not going to be a fun day for you. And that's why one of the tests we have a special test. It's called equipotential bonding. We use the same O-scope, differential O-scope meter, and we use special connectors where we call it the 4-wire measurement, because most ohm meters work with not only putting the, let's say, the test current through the leads, but also taking the test through the leads. So there's a lot of resistance, and we can't do ohm readings below 1 ohm, safely. But by using the 4-wire, we separate those two, and now we can do below 1 ohm safely. We can go down to less than 40 milli ohms, less than 10, okay? And it has to be used anytime you loosen or you replace a component. Component to component has to be less than 10. Component to chassis has to be less than 40. If it's not, in the case of a short, what happens when we run a high amount of amperage through a bad connection? Anybody tell me? Heat. And what does heat raise? Well, it raises resistance. How long with 600 amps, okay, do you think it's going to take for that connection to get above 1,000 ohms and make you the path of least resistance? Right. So again, by the technician doing these, and it's mandatory, he has to do it. He's also keeping you safe. Maybe you're under there just looking at stuff, cleaning leaves out, and you're on 2 different components. And they, we need these systems, and we have the procedure for it to be, accurate, to be sure that the vehicle is shut down and the thing is ready to be worked on. So, the other thing is some of the things we were also talking about. So we also have additional protections in the car, active and passive shutdown. We also have the pilot line that we alluded to. We have something called high voltage interlock, which is basically a smaller segments of pilot line, making sure your lines are connected. If one was loose or would fall off, it will detect an open circuit, and it will also, it won't shut it down while you're driving the car because that will be a safety hazard, but when you shut it off, it won't re-energize the vehicle, okay? Last one, we got insulation resistance. So the car does its own insulation tests, resistance tests, where it's going to actually look for these single faults, a deterioration. These should be mega ohms, 5 mega ohms or larger, sometimes giga ohms when you're testing some of these circuits. But it will actually take a single, run it to actually chassis, and it'll look for any kind of current draw. Because if it has it, then it knows it probably has a deterioration of resistance. It will set an insulation fault, and now the technician has to do insulation testing, okay, to find those faults. So current limit monitoring, again, the cars are programmed, we know how many amps those cars are going to draw under different conditions. If the amperages exceed limits for an operating state, it can also set a fault and shut that vehicle down. Okay? Yes?
So if you're monitoring here, you're talking about current limiting out of battery. What about current limiting out of the inverter? Do you check that?
Do I check that? Does the technician check that, you mean?
Does the car check that? Because obviously if you have a current limit fault out of the inverter, you know, you're going to have a problem probably running the motor or something like that.
Well, yeah, but I think it's checking the current limiting, I think, is in your power inverters. That's where it is. So yes, we are checking that.
Okay.
Right.
We're not checking it directly out of the battery, we're checking it in the inverter.
Well, you know, ultimately, it's going to be a similar situation. I mean, you're going to have a certain amount of, like a Taycan takes about 600 amps for the most part. The newer car, I think we're up to about 1,000 amps with the newer car, okay? But, yeah, it's going to be checking it through the entire system because, again, we know the parameters. That's how we monitor faults. That's how we set faults, okay? So. Let's see. We're 5 minutes? Thank you. Okay. Then put that down, pick that up. Okay, preparing it for repair. So now, after, you know, all that, the technician basically will be bringing it in, putting the sign on the car, and then he's going to find out with this document, isolation from power supply, performing maintenance tasks on any of our vehicles. It is a chart that we've given them so that they can go down and say, okay, yep, I need to isolate the power supply. Or no, I do not need to isolate the power supply. So it's how the technician can be sure he either needs the car shut down or not shut down. If he does have to isolate it, like we said before, he can do the automatic shutdown, and then he can go to work on the car. Some technicians do the automatic and the manual just to be sure, okay, which is fine. Or you could just do the automatic. But if the car has a fault in it or some sort of an issue, they're all going to do both of them to make sure that they're safe. Because you could be shutting it down just to simply do that catalytic converter on that Cayenne, for example. There's no real problem with the car. Then we need to secure it. So to do that, we take, for example, on the newer cars, we put a lock on this green connector so that it cannot be closed, okay? And then we put the key in our toolbox so nobody can get to it. If it's the earlier car, well, it's passed around that thing, we'll take the key to the car, and we'll lock both of those in our toolbox so nobody can re-energize the car. That's going to be securing it from being turned back on. And then verifying, if we're doing manual, is going to be either looking at the test sheet that the tester will print out for us to verify we have, you know, no dangerous voltages anywhere in the system, that it passed the automatic test, or we will be checking, testing, and hooking this up and do all pole measurements to make sure there's no voltage in the system. Some of our cars, we can even use the tester and we can look at an overview of different control units in the vehicle to see that that voltage has disappeared and gone away. You want to be sure. You don't want to be working on a live car. Unless you have to, and then you're going to have to be an HVS or you're going to have to be an HVE. Returning the BEV to service. This is actually a little more complicated. It takes a little longer. So we have changed vehicle status. First thing we do is, before we've done anything, we put the red sign back on it. Because anybody walking up, we want to make sure they know, even if we didn't hook it up yet, stay away. It's dangerous. Then we have a test log we need to complete, starting the high voltage system. in accordance with components replaced or not, because what we do depends on if we've done any particular work. So for example, if components are replaced, we must perform the potential equalization measurement, check all of those equipotential bonding grounds, make sure that they're perfect, okay? Component to component should be less than 10 milliohms, and component to chassis less than 40. Some of the cars will have us do insulation measurements where we will plug in adapters into the charging sockets, for example, okay, and or the components themselves, and we will take, again, this specific meter, and we have a program that we can set this to 500 volts or 1,000 volts. And we will actually go into two locations where you should not have any kind of a connection, which would be, we will go PE, which is potential earth or chassis, our shield, okay? We will plug it into positive in there, and we'll pump 1,000 volts into there. And we should not have, our voltage should build, we should not have any bleeding of that voltage to ground. If we do, it fails the insulation test. And it's going to give us some measurements. It's going to give us some readings, okay? For example, I think for SAE, the minimum amount would be 400 ohms per volt of a reading that you should be reading, okay? Our scale is a minimum of 1,000, so we've even gone above that standard for SAE. But that might be the EU standard as well. But then we'll go positive to negative, we'll go, or positive to PE, and then we'll switch it for polarity reasons, because some of the circuits we check have diodes and whatnot, circuitry in it, that if we don't switch the polarity, we might not test the whole circuit because the voltage will be blocked. So we're going to do 2 readings per test point, and when we get good, we move on to the next one. So it could either be the 400 volt circuit or it could be the 800. It's whatever is required for the component that was replaced, okay? If components were not replaced, we need to open and remove the padlock, close the service disconnector, lock the vehicle for 10 minutes. This is going to let the bus go idle. And then after 10 minutes, when we unlock the car and re-energize the car, because once we closed it, we've connected up our high voltage system. It allows communication, everybody talks to everybody, and now it's like, oh, okay, we're hooked up again. So now we should be able to go in, read out our fault memories, and they should all be gray faults or not present faults. If we do have a permanent fault under that situation, then we'll have to use proper diagnostic methods to figure out what is going on there. So then the last thing is we need to go into our high voltage charger control unit. Some of our cars, the charge port doors will lock to make sure that you can't get to them, they're safe, nobody can mess with them. And for example, the Panameras, you must go in and unlock those, or else, in theory, if you forget, I could give you your car back and you get home, go to plug it in, the door won't open. You're not going to be too happy. So it's also written into other cars, so we do it on the other cars as well, although it seems just the Panamera is the one that really locks us out. The Taycans always seem to open, but we run the procedure anyways because that's what Porsche tells us to do. And that way we're sure we've done it correctly and the car is safe to hand back over to you. So at that point, the car is back online. It'll go to the detail department, get all cleaned up, and whatever we did, you'll see your service writer and you'll get a call to pick your car up. So you can see the technicians, they're using a much different procedure, and it's all safety-based. It's all safety-based. If we don't have the procedures, somebody will get hurt. And so far, I don't know of anybody who's gotten hurt, okay? Certainly in a Porsche dealership, as far as using these procedures. So, I don't know what I did with it, so I'll do this. Doop. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Does Porsche have a requirement how many Here you go. Thank you.
Does Porsche have a requirement for how many technicians they need to have that have gone through this training in each dealership?
I don't know if there's a specific number. I'm going to ask Mr. Kitlitz. Do you know, is it a certain number? They certainly need them to, if you're working on hybrids or BEVs, you need to have trained technicians, but
2 technicians minimum for small dealers, larger dealers, more technicians than we'll have.
there you go. And it's also linked to certification. So for example, you need to be an HVT to be silver, you need to be an HVS to be gold, a gold technician. Therefore, if you look at the bronze, silver, and gold certification of the technicians in the dealer, you can kind of extrapolate how many have this training, okay? And I'm sure they'd be happy to let you know at the front counter, you know? So, thank you very much, everybody.